My daughter blocked my phone number on a Tuesday morning. By Friday, she had blocked my emails. By the end of the month, I couldn't see her social media, speak to my grandchildren, or even leave a voicemail. After 68 years of life and 20 years of raising her alone, I had become a stranger to my own child. For 11 months, I heard nothing from Vanessa Bell Carter. Then one rainy afternoon, a representative from my lawyer's office knocked on her front door carrying a thick legal envelope. What was inside wasn't revenge. It was the truth she had spent nearly a year running from. And when she finally opened it, her entire marriage began to fall apart. Before I tell you what happened, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been pushed away by someone you loved only to discover there was more to the story than you knew? Let me know in the comments. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world today, tell me your city and what time it is there. If stories about family resilience and second chances mean something to you, please like and subscribe. Now let me tell you how I lost my daughter and how the truth brought her back. My name is Norma Bell, and for most of my life, I believed that if you loved your child enough, worked hard enough, and sacrificed enough, that love would always find its way back to you. I know now that life isn't always that simple. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in the same modest brick house where I raised my daughter, Vanessa. The maple tree in the front yard is taller than the roof now. Daniel planted it when Vanessa was 6 years old. He said someday she would sit beneath it with her own children. For a long time, I thought he was right. Daniel Bell was the kind of man people trusted immediately. He wasn't wealthy, famous, or powerful. He worked as an engineer for a manufacturing company and spent weekends fixing neighbors' fences without charging a dime. More importantly, he was a wonderful father. When Vanessa was little, she adored him. Every Saturday morning they made pancakes together. Every summer they spent hours fishing at a small lake outside the city. Every birthday, Daniel would leave handwritten notes hidden around the house for her to find. Those are some of the happiest memories I have. Then everything changed. Vanessa was 12 when Daniel was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors tried to be hopeful at first. Daniel tried even harder. He smiled through treatments. He attended school events when he barely had the strength to stand. He pretended everything would be okay because he didn't want Vanessa to be afraid. But children are smarter than adults realize. She knew. We all knew. The final year of Daniel's life felt like watching a storm slowly approach while being powerless to stop it. I remember one particular evening. Vanessa had fallen asleep on the couch after crying herself exhausted. Daniel sat beside me at the kitchen table. The house was silent. The medical bills were stacked in front of us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. "If something happens to me," he said softly, "promise me you'll protect her." I squeezed his hand. "Of course. No matter what." I laughed through tears. What kind of father asks a mother to promise that? But Daniel wasn't smiling. His expression was serious, almost troubled. "Promise me anyway." So I did. A few months later, he was gone. I still remember the exact moment, the hospital room, the sound of machines, the feeling that the world had suddenly become much larger and much colder. For weeks afterward, I functioned on pure instinct. Wake up, go to work, take care of Vanessa, pay bills, repeat. There wasn't time to grieve properly. Single mothers don't always have that luxury. The following years were the hardest of my life. During the day, I worked at the public library. In the evenings, I handled bookkeeping for a small local business. Weekends often disappeared into overtime shifts and paperwork. There were months when I wasn't sure how I would cover every expense. The mortgage, the utilities, school activities, clothes, college savings. Every dollar mattered. I learned how to stretch grocery budgets. I learned how to repair things myself. I learned how to smile even when I was terrified. Because Vanessa needed stability. She needed at least one parent who appeared strong. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. Not a single sacrifice. When she graduated high school, I cried harder than anyone in the audience. When she got accepted into college, I framed the acceptance letter. When she earned her degree, I thought Daniel would have been proud beyond words. For years, Vanessa and I were incredibly close. We talked almost every day. We shared holidays. We took mother-daughter road trips. People often commented that we seemed more like best friends than mother and daughter. Maybe that's why what happened later hurt so much. Because the distance didn't appear overnight. It started slowly, almost invisibly. But before I tell you about that, there's something important you need to understand. Something Vanessa never knew. A few weeks after Daniel died, I met with an attorney regarding his estate. At the time, I assumed there wouldn't be much to discuss. We didn't consider ourselves wealthy. We lived comfortably, but nothing more. I remember sitting in that office feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. The attorney opened a folder and began reviewing documents Daniel had prepared months before his death. Most of it was ordinary. Life insurance, retirement accounts, property records. Then the attorney reached a separate section. One Daniel had marked with specific instructions. The attorney paused before speaking. "Mrs. Bell," he said, "your husband established something unusual." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He created a protected trust." I had never heard of it. Daniel had never mentioned it. The attorney explained that over many years, Daniel had quietly invested money into a carefully structured account. Not millions, nothing extravagant, but significant enough to matter, especially for a family like ours. The trust was designed for one purpose: Vanessa. Only Vanessa, yet it came with conditions. Conditions Daniel had personally written and insisted upon. I remember staring at the paperwork in confusion. "Why wouldn't he tell me about this?" The attorney looked down at the documents, then back at me. "According to your husband, he believed the information should remain confidential until a future date." I felt a chill run through me. Even now, after all these years, I remember that feeling. Because Daniel had left something else behind. A sealed letter. One addressed to me. Inside were only a few paragraphs. But one sentence has stayed with me ever since. Norma. Someday Vanessa may need protection from someone she trusts completely. If that day comes, you'll know what to do. At the time, I thought grief had made him overly cautious. I thought illness had filled his mind with unnecessary worries. I folded the letter and stored it away. I never imagined those words would become the most important warning of my entire life. And I certainly never imagined that the person threatening my daughter's future would one day be sitting across from her at the dinner table, wearing a wedding ring. The first time I met Michael Carter, I understood exactly why my daughter fell in love with him. He was charming. Not the loud, attention-seeking kind of charming. Michael had a quieter style that made people feel comfortable almost immediately. He listened carefully when others spoke. He remembered details from previous conversations. He knew how to make a person feel important. At least that's what I thought. Vanessa introduced him to me during a Sunday lunch at a small Italian restaurant near downtown Columbus. I remember arriving early and watching them walk through the front door together. Vanessa looked happy, radiant actually, the kind of happiness every mother hopes to see in her child. Michael shook my hand firmly. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Mrs. Bell." "Please," I said with a smile. Call me Norma." For the next 2 hours, he seemed nearly perfect. He asked about my work at the library. He asked about Vanessa's childhood. He even spoke respectfully about Daniel after hearing a few stories. When we left the restaurant, Vanessa squeezed my arm. "Well?" she asked. I laughed. "Well, what? What do you think?" I smiled. "I think he's very impressive." Her face lit up. Looking back now, that memory hurts more than I can explain. Because I truly wanted him to be a good man. Over the next year, Michael became a regular part of our lives. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations. He attended everything. He never missed an opportunity to present himself as the caring future son-in-law. When Vanessa announced their engagement, I hugged both of them. I meant it. I was genuinely happy. After losing Daniel so young, I wanted Vanessa to have the stable marriage she'd always dreamed about. And initially, it seemed she had found exactly that. The wedding was beautiful, small but elegant, held in a restored historic venue outside Columbus. I remember standing in the front row watching Vanessa walk down the aisle. For a moment, I imagined Daniel standing beside me, proud, emotional, certain his daughter was beginning a wonderful new chapter. I wish he had been there. Maybe he would have seen something I missed. Because the changes began shortly after the wedding. At first, they were so subtle that I barely noticed them. Michael started making little comments. Nothing openly offensive, nothing dramatic. Just observations, tiny remarks. Seeds planted carefully. One evening, the three of us were having dinner together when Vanessa mentioned a weekend trip she and I had been discussing. Michael smiled. "That's nice." Then he laughed softly. "You two spend so much time together. Sometimes I think Norma misses having a daughter at home." Everyone chuckled. Even me. The comment seemed harmless. But later I noticed Vanessa cancel the trip. A few weeks afterward, something similar happened. We were discussing holiday plans. Michael casually said, "I think married couples need space from extended family sometimes." Again, he said it with a smile. Again, nobody argued. Again, Vanessa changed her plans afterward. Little by little, I began seeing a pattern. Michael rarely demanded anything directly. Instead, he framed his opinions as reasonable observations, suggestions, concerns, questions. The effect was far more powerful, because Vanessa believed every decision was her own. Then came the financial questions. At first, they seemed innocent. One afternoon, Michael was helping me carry groceries into the house. As we walked toward the kitchen, he glanced around. "This property must be worth quite a bit now." I shrugged. "More than when Daniel and I bought it. Real estate has exploded lately." I nodded. That was the end of the conversation. Or so I thought. A few weeks later, he asked another question. What happened to Daniel's retirement account? Another time, he asked whether I planned to downsize. Then he asked about life insurance, then savings, then investments, always casually, always smiling, always sounding curious rather than interested. Eventually, I mentioned it to Vanessa. We were having coffee together. "Does Michael always ask so many questions about finances?" She laughed. "He's a financial consultant, Mom. That's what he does." Maybe she was right. I tried to dismiss my concerns, but the questions continued, and they became more specific. One evening during dinner, Michael asked whether I had updated my will. The question caught me off guard. "I don't think that's dinner conversation." He laughed. "Fair point." But I noticed something strange. Vanessa looked uncomfortable, not embarrassed, nervous, as though they had already discussed the topic privately. For the first time, a small knot formed in my stomach. I couldn't explain why. I simply felt uneasy. Months passed. Then another change appeared. Vanessa began calling less often. For most of her life, we spoke nearly every day. Now several days sometimes passed without contact. When I called, she often seemed distracted, rushed, preoccupied. I blamed work, marriage, adult responsibilities. Life gets busy. I understood that. But then, family traditions started disappearing too. The Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional, then rare. Every time I suggested getting together, there seemed to be a reason it wouldn't work. Scheduling conflicts, travel plans, work obligations. Something always came up. One afternoon, I stopped by unexpectedly with homemade soup because Vanessa had mentioned feeling sick earlier that week. Michael answered the door. His smile looked forced. "Vanessa's resting." "Oh, I won't stay long. I think she'd rather not be disturbed." The words weren't rude, but they weren't welcoming either. I left feeling strangely unwelcome. A few days later, Vanessa called. Instead of thanking me for checking on her, she sounded irritated. "You really shouldn't just show up." I blinked in surprise. "I was bringing soup." "I know, but we're trying to establish boundaries." Boundaries? The word hit me harder than it should have, because it sounded rehearsed, not like Vanessa, like something she'd heard elsewhere, something she'd been taught to say. After that conversation, I started paying closer attention, and what I saw worried me. Michael increasingly controlled discussions. He often answered questions directed at Vanessa. He corrected her stories, finished her sentences, explained her opinions before she could speak. Most people didn't notice. The behavior was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. The most alarming moment came during a family barbecue nearly 2 years after the wedding. A relative asked Vanessa whether she planned to pursue a management position she'd once wanted badly. Before she could answer, Michael laughed. "That phase passed." Vanessa smiled weakly. "Yeah, I guess it did." Something about the exchange felt wrong. Not because of what was said, because of what wasn't. The old Vanessa would have answered immediately, confidently, independently. This Vanessa seemed to wait for permission. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my living room thinking about Daniel's letter, the one I'd locked away years earlier. The sentence I had always dismissed suddenly returned to me. Someday Vanessa may need protection from someone she trusts completely. For the first time in decades, those words frightened me, and as if the universe wanted to confirm my fears, I received information a few weeks later that changed everything. Information revealing that Michael Carter wasn't nearly as successful as he claimed. In fact, behind the polished smile and expensive suits, he was carrying a secret that could destroy everything. A secret involving debt. A lot of debt. The information about Michael's debt didn't come from a private investigator. Not yet. At that point, I wasn't even looking for evidence. The truth found me by accident. One afternoon, I was volunteering at a community fundraiser when I ran into an old acquaintance named Patricia Lawson. Years earlier, Patricia had worked at a regional bank where many local financial professionals maintained accounts and business relationships. We spent a few minutes catching up, talking about retirement, talking about grandchildren, talking about life. Then she mentioned something unexpected. "How's your son-in-law doing these days?" I smiled politely. "As far as I know, he's doing well." Patricia hesitated. The expression on her face immediately caught my attention. "What?" I asked. "Oh, it's probably nothing." "What is it?" She looked uncomfortable. I shouldn't even bring it up. Now I was curious. Patricia lowered her voice. I just remember hearing his name connected to some financial problems a few years back. I felt my stomach tighten. What kind of problems? She shook her head. I honestly don't know the details. It may have been nothing serious. Then she changed the subject. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. For days afterward, Patricia's comment lingered in my mind. Financial problems. The words refused to disappear. I told myself not to overreact. Everyone struggles sometimes. Debt alone doesn't make someone a bad person. Still, something about Michael's recent behavior made the information feel important, especially when combined with his growing interest in my finances. A week later, Vanessa invited me to dinner. At first, I felt relieved. We hadn't spent meaningful time together in nearly a month. Maybe things were improving. Maybe my concerns were unnecessary. I arrived carrying a homemade apple pie. Vanessa hugged me, but something felt different. She seemed tense, distracted, like someone preparing for an unpleasant conversation. Michael greeted me warmly as always. Too warmly. Dinner began normally. We discussed work, the weather, local news. Then the conversation shifted. Michael guided it there so smoothly that I almost missed it. Norma, he said casually, have you ever considered selling your house? I laughed. Why would I? It's a large property for one person. I like my house, of course. He smiled. But eventually, you'll probably want something smaller. I set down my fork. Eventually, maybe. Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with him. The look lasted only a second, but I noticed. Something silent passed between them. A conversation without words. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked into a meeting rather than a family dinner. Then things became worse. Over the following months, Vanessa started repeating statements that didn't sound like her. At first, they were small. Mom, you worry too much. Mom, not everything is your business. Mom, married couples need privacy. None of those statements were unreasonable, but they arrived so frequently that they felt rehearsed, like lines from a script. The woman speaking sounded like my daughter. The opinions sounded like Michael. One Saturday afternoon, I called Vanessa to ask whether she wanted to attend a craft fair we'd visited together for years. Her response stunned me. I don't think we need to do everything together anymore. I sat silently for a moment. I wasn't suggesting we do everything together. I know. Her tone hardened. But sometimes it feels like you don't respect boundaries. There was that word again. Boundaries. Always boundaries. Always distance. Always separation. I hung up feeling as though someone had slowly replaced my daughter with a stranger. Months passed. The emotional distance grew wider. Then came Thanksgiving, the holiday that finally made me realize how serious the situation had become. Our family had celebrated Thanksgiving together every year since Vanessa was born, even after Daniel died, even during difficult financial years. It was our tradition, our anchor. 2 weeks before the holiday, I called to discuss plans. Vanessa sounded uncomfortable. We already made arrangements. What arrangements? We'll be spending Thanksgiving with Michael's friends. I was surprised. Oh. Silence filled the phone. Then I quietly asked, all day? Yes. Another silence. Maybe we can meet another time. The conversation ended shortly afterward. That Thanksgiving, I sat alone at my dining room table. The empty chair across from me felt heavier than any object should. I tried to convince myself it wasn't personal. Families change. Children grow up. Life evolves. But deep down, I knew something else was happening. Something I couldn't yet identify. Christmas was even worse. The invitation never came. Instead, I received a text message 2 days before the holiday. "We're staying home this year. Maybe next year. Love, Vanessa." Love. The word felt almost cruel, because the actions behind it said something entirely different. Then came the event that changed everything. A large family birthday gathering for my cousin Helen. Nearly 30 relatives attended. For once, Vanessa and Michael showed up. I hoped the gathering might help reconnect us. I was wrong. The evening began pleasantly. People laughed, shared stories, enjoyed dinner. Then someone asked about family vacations. A harmless question. At least it should have been. I mentioned that Vanessa and I used to take road trips together every summer. I smiled at the memory. Before I could say anything else, Vanessa interrupted. "We don't really do that anymore." Her tone was cold. Several relatives looked surprised. I tried to keep the mood light. "Life gets busy." But Vanessa wasn't finished. "Honestly, it's healthier this way." The room grew quiet. I stared at her. "What does that mean?" She crossed her arms. "It means some parents have trouble letting go." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Michael sat beside her, saying nothing. Watching, observing, almost enjoying it. I felt my face grow warm. "Vanessa." "No, Mom. People should hear this." The room became completely silent. My heart pounded. "Sometimes you've been controlling." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Controlling. "You always need to know everything." I looked around the room. Family members avoided eye contact. Embarrassment spread through the air like smoke. "I've spent my entire life supporting you. I didn't ask for that." The words hit me like a slap. Several relatives gasped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because of anger, because of heartbreak. I barely recognized the woman speaking. The daughter I had raised would never have humiliated someone publicly, especially not family, especially not me. Then I noticed something. Michael wasn't participating in the argument. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't calming Vanessa. Instead, he had his phone positioned strangely on the table. The camera lens pointed directly toward us. Recording. My pulse quickened. Why was he recording? This wasn't an accident. This wasn't spontaneous. It felt planned, prepared, deliberate. Suddenly, every strange interaction from the previous 2 years began connecting in my mind. The financial questions, the growing isolation, the repeated accusations, the emphasis on boundaries. And now this public confrontation being recorded. For the first time, genuine fear entered my heart. Not for myself, for Vanessa. Because I had a terrible feeling that someone was building a story around me, a story designed to make me look controlling, unstable, and intrusive. A story that could eventually justify cutting me out completely. That night I drove home in tears. But before going to bed, I did something I hadn't done in years. I unlocked the small safe in my closet. I removed Daniel's letter, and I read it again. This time the warning no longer felt hypothetical. This time it felt real. And within a few months, my worst fears would come true. Because the next step wasn't another argument. The next step was far more devastating. My own daughter was about to erase me from her life completely. The day my daughter blocked me began like any other day. There was no warning, no dramatic argument, no final conversation. Just silence. At first, I didn't even realize it had happened. I called Vanessa one Tuesday morning to tell her about a funny story from the library. One of our elderly patrons had accidentally donated a box of old baseball cards worth thousands of dollars, and the entire staff had spent the morning trying to track him down. Normally, Vanessa would have laughed. She loved those little stories. Instead, the call went directly to voicemail. That wasn't unusual. People get busy. I left a message. A few hours later, I sent a text. No response. The next day, I called again, straight to voicemail. Again. And again. By Friday, something felt wrong. I sent an email. No reply. The following week, I tried messaging her through Facebook. The message wouldn't go through. Confused, I checked her profile. I couldn't find it. At first, I assumed she had deactivated her account. Then I searched using another account. There it was. Visible, active. Just not visible to me. My stomach dropped. She had blocked me. I sat frozen in front of my computer screen. For several minutes, I simply stared, trying to understand, trying to find a reasonable explanation. There wasn't one. Over the next few days, I discovered the truth piece by piece. My phone number had been blocked. My emails were being filtered. My social media accounts were restricted. Every digital path leading to my daughter had been closed. Deliberately, completely. I felt physically ill. Not angry. Not yet. Heartbroken. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? What had I done? I replayed every recent conversation in my mind, every interaction, every disagreement. Nothing justified this. Nothing. 2 weeks later, I drove to her house. I didn't want to. I knew it would probably make things worse, but I needed answers. I parked across the street and sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage. Finally, I walked to the front door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then I noticed movement behind a curtain. Someone was inside, watching, not opening the door. I stood there for almost a minute, then slowly turned around and left. The humiliation stayed with me for days. What hurt even more was losing access to my grandchildren. Emily was 10, Jacob was 8. I had attended every birthday, every school play, every soccer game. Now, suddenly, I was gone. Erased. The following month, I mailed birthday gifts to Emily. The package came back unopened. A bright red sticker covered the box. Return to sender. I stared at it on my kitchen table and cried, not because of the money, because somewhere inside that box was a birthday card telling my granddaughter how much I loved her, a card she would never read. Christmas was even worse. I mailed gifts again. Again they returned. I sent letters. No response. I tried everything a mother could reasonably try. Nothing worked. Eventually, friends began asking questions. Have you spoken to Vanessa lately? When are you seeing the grandkids? How's the family? I started lying, not because I wanted to, because telling the truth was too painful. Months passed. The loneliness became overwhelming. Then one evening, while sorting old paperwork, I came across Rebecca Hayes' business card. Rebecca had been Daniel's attorney for years. After his death, she handled several estate matters for me. I trusted her completely. The next morning, I scheduled an appointment. I didn't know exactly what I needed. Legal advice, emotional support answers. Maybe all three. Rebecca greeted me warmly when I arrived. She was in her early 60s now, sharp-eyed and calm with the kind of presence that made people feel safe. After a few minutes of conversation, she leaned forward. Tell me everything. So I did. The distancing, the accusations, the family gathering, the blocking, the silence, the returned gifts. Everything. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When I finished, she remained quiet for a long moment. Then she asked a question I wasn't expecting. Have Vanessa and Michael ever discussed your estate? I blinked. My estate. Yes. I hesitated. Michael has asked questions over the years. Rebecca's expression tightened. What kind of questions? I described the conversations, the house, the savings, the will, the retirement accounts, the life insurance. As I spoke, Rebecca took notes. Lots of notes. When I finished, she slowly closed her notebook. Norma, I don't want to alarm you. The words immediately alarmed me, but I've seen situations like this before. A cold feeling settled in my chest. What kind of situations? Rebecca folded her hands. Situations where a family member is gradually isolated from someone who may become financially significant later. I stared at her. You think this is about money? I think it's possible. The answer felt impossible. Vanessa wasn't greedy. She wasn't manipulative. She wasn't cruel. Rebecca seemed to read my thoughts. I'm not talking about Vanessa. Immediately, my mind went to Michael. For the first time, someone else was saying aloud what I had only whispered to myself. Rebecca continued, Has Vanessa signed any financial documents recently? I don't know. Has Michael gained increasing influence over household finances? I assume so. She nodded slowly, then she asked another question. Have you updated your estate plan recently? No. You need to. I felt confused. Why? Because if someone is positioning themselves to benefit from future inheritance, we need to make sure your intentions are protected. The room suddenly felt smaller, heavier, more serious. Rebecca wasn't speaking hypothetically anymore. She was speaking like an attorney identifying risk, a professional concern, and that frightened me. For the next hour, we reviewed documents. My will, property records, financial accounts, trust information, including the protected trust Daniel had created years earlier. Rebecca examined everything carefully. Then she looked up. There's another issue. What issue? If Michael believes certain assets exist, he may be making assumptions that aren't accurate. I frowned. What do you mean? He may think your estate is worth significantly more than it actually is. That caught my attention because over the years, Michael had consistently acted as though hidden wealth existed somewhere, as though he was waiting for something, watching something, calculating something. Rebecca tapped a folder thoughtfully. Norma? I'm not saying Michael is definitely planning anything, but I think we need to be proactive. The word proactive would end up changing the course of everything, because that afternoon marked the beginning of a completely different chapter. The chapter where I stopped reacting and started preparing. For the first time, I considered a possibility I had desperately avoided. What if Michael wasn't simply influencing my daughter? What if he had been working toward a specific goal all along? And if that was true, how far was he willing to go to reach it? I was about to find out. Because within weeks, evidence would emerge that Michael Carter's interest in my family wasn't accidental. It was strategic. And the target had never been me. The target was everything he believed I would eventually leave behind. For several weeks after meeting with Rebecca Hayes, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the same questions returned. Was Michael truly manipulating Vanessa, or was grief and loneliness making me suspicious? Had I become exactly what Vanessa accused me of being, an overprotective mother unable to let go? Part of me desperately wanted that explanation to be true. Because if I was wrong, then my daughter could still come back on her own. If I was wrong, then our family wasn't being destroyed from the inside. But Rebecca wasn't convinced. And neither was I. 3 weeks after our meeting, she called me. "Norma, I'd like you to meet someone." "Who?" "A private investigator." I nearly dropped the phone. "A private investigator." I know it sounds extreme. It is extreme. "Not if we're trying to protect your daughter." Those words silenced me. Protect your daughter. Not protect your money. Not protect your reputation. Protect your daughter. 2 days later, I sat across from a man named Thomas Reed. Thomas was nothing like the investigators you see on television. No dramatic speeches, no flashy personality. He looked more like a retired accountant than a detective. Calm, methodical, observant. The kind of man who noticed details others ignored. Rebecca introduced us and explained the situation. Thomas listened quietly. When she finished, he asked only a handful of questions. Most of them centered on Michael, his employment history, past addresses, previous relationships, financial background. The answers I could provide were surprisingly limited, which in hindsight was revealing. Michael had been part of our lives for years, yet I knew remarkably little about his life before Vanessa. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's not unusual." "What isn't?" "People who carefully manage their image often reveal very little about their history." I didn't like the way that sounded. The investigation began the following week. At first I expected nothing. Maybe some old credit card problems, a failed business venture, normal financial struggles. What Thomas discovered was far more troubling. The first report arrived about a month later. I remember sitting in Rebecca's office as Thomas reviewed his findings. "Michael Carter has substantial debt." My stomach tightened. "How substantial?" Thomas slid a folder across the table. "Much more than he's disclosed publicly." Inside were records, credit obligations, personal loans, collection notices, financial judgments. Several accounts had been settled, others had not. The total amount was shocking, far beyond what I had imagined. Rebecca frowned. "Would Vanessa know about these?" Thomas shook his head. "Based on available evidence, probably not." I stared at the paperwork. Michael presented himself as a successful financial consultant, a man who gave advice to others. Yet behind the scenes, his own finances were collapsing. The contradiction made no sense. Until Thomas continued. "There's more." I looked up. "What more?" He opened another folder. "This pattern isn't new." The room grew quiet. Thomas explained that Michael had a history of attaching himself to financially stable environments, not criminally, not illegally, at least not on paper. But the pattern was unmistakable. Previous relationships, previous social circles, previous professional connections. Again and again, Michael seemed drawn toward people with assets, property, or expected inheritances. The realization made my skin crawl. "Are you saying he targeted Vanessa?" Thomas chose his words carefully. "I'm saying the pattern deserves attention." Rebecca's expression told me she understood exactly what he meant. Targeted. Maybe not at first. Maybe not consciously. But somewhere along the way, Michael had recognized opportunity, and opportunity had become strategy. Over the next several weeks, additional information emerged. Some of it was deeply disturbing. Thomas discovered that Michael frequently exaggerated his professional success. He inflated business achievements, misrepresented investment performance, presented himself as more financially secure than he actually was. None of it crossed into obvious fraud, but it created an image, a carefully constructed image, one designed to inspire trust, one designed to discourage questions. The deeper Thomas dug, the more uneasy I became. Then came the finding that changed everything. One afternoon, Rebecca called and asked me to come to her office immediately. Her tone was serious, urgent. When I arrived, Thomas was already there. Neither of them looked happy. "What happened?" I asked. Thomas opened a folder. "Michael has been researching inheritance law." I frowned. "So, extensively." My confusion deepened. "Lots of people research inheritance law." Rebecca leaned forward. "Norma, not like this." Thomas showed me copies of publicly accessible searches and records connected to business activity Michael had conducted. Estate disputes, inheritance challenges, trust contests, undue influence claims, elder financial control, family asset transfers. The list went on for pages. A cold wave moved through my body, because suddenly I remembered something: the recording, the family gathering, the public confrontation. Michael recording Vanessa accusing me of being controlling, of being manipulative, of refusing to respect boundaries. At the time it had seemed strange. Now it felt deliberate, calculated, potential evidence, a narrative being built. Rebecca voiced the thought I couldn't bring myself to say. If someone wanted to challenge future estate decisions, creating documentation of alleged family conflict could become useful. The room became silent. I stared at the papers, then at Daniel's letter, which I had begun carrying in my purse. The warning no longer felt symbolic. It felt terrifyingly specific. Someday Vanessa may need protection from someone she trusts completely. For the first time, I believed Daniel had been right. Not because he predicted Michael, because he understood human nature. He understood that trust can become a weapon in the wrong hands. Over the next month, Thomas uncovered one final piece of information: a former relationship. Years earlier, Michael had dated a woman whose family owned significant commercial property. The relationship ended abruptly. No crime, no scandal, nothing illegal. But according to available records, financial disputes appeared shortly before the breakup. The details remained unclear, yet the pattern repeated once again. Assets, opportunity, influence, conflict. Then departure. I sat in silence after hearing the report. The sadness I felt was overwhelming, because this wasn't about proving Michael was a criminal. It wasn't even about proving he married Vanessa for money. It was something worse. It was realizing that every instinct warning me something was wrong had been justified, and that my daughter was trapped inside a marriage built on deception. The hardest part wasn't learning the truth. The hardest part was understanding that Vanessa wouldn't believe me. Not now. Not after months of distance. Not after the accusations. Not after being blocked. If I approached her with evidence, Michael would simply convince her I was interfering again. The situation felt impossible. Then Rebecca said something that changed my perspective completely. "Stop trying to convince Vanessa." I looked at her. "What? You don't need to win an argument." "Then what do I do?" "Protect her future." The words settled over me slowly. Protect her future. Not her current choices. Not her current opinions. Her future. Rebecca opened a folder containing documents related to my estate, my will, my assets, Daniel's trust, property records, financial protections, and suddenly I understood. We couldn't control Michael. We couldn't control Vanessa. But we could control what happened next. We could make sure that if Michael's real objective involved future inheritance, he would never reach it. Not through manipulation, not through isolation, not through Vanessa. That realization marked the beginning of the most difficult decision of my life, because protecting my daughter would require doing something she might never understand, something that would make the distance between us even greater for a time. I would have to quietly change everything, every document, every plan, every safeguard Daniel had left behind, and I would have to do it without telling her. The most painful decisions in life are often the ones nobody sees. People imagine courage as dramatic confrontations, raised voices, powerful speeches, final ultimatums. But sometimes courage looks like sitting alone at a conference table while signing documents that may save someone you love from a mistake they refuse to recognize. That was the season of my life I entered next. Rebecca Hayes and I spent months reviewing every aspect of my estate, every account, every property document, every beneficiary designation, every legal protection. It felt strange at first, almost surreal. I wasn't wealthy, at least not in the way people imagine wealth. I didn't own mansions, private jets, luxury vacation homes. The truth was much simpler. I owned my house. I had retirement savings. I had Daniel's carefully protected trust. And I had several investments accumulated over decades of responsible planning. Enough to create security. Enough to create temptation. Apparently enough to attract someone like Michael Carter. The first meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. Rebecca spread documents across a large conference table. "Before we make any changes," she said, "I want to be absolutely clear about something." I nodded. "You are not disinheriting Vanessa." The statement immediately relieved me, because that had been my greatest fear. No matter what had happened between us, Vanessa was still my daughter. Nothing could change that. I never wanted to disinherit her. "I know," Rebecca smiled gently, "and we're not going to." Tears unexpectedly filled my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt understood. Because everyone assumes legal planning is about punishment. It wasn't. This was about protection. A very different thing. Rebecca continued, "The goal is not to keep assets from Vanessa. The goal is to keep assets from Michael." The distinction mattered a lot. Over the next several weeks, we began restructuring everything. Every change had one purpose: protect Vanessa's future without rewarding manipulation. The process was complicated. Some documents required revisions. Others required replacement. Several needed entirely new legal structures. Rebecca explained every detail patiently. Most of it was far beyond my expertise. But one recommendation stood out immediately: a conditional trust. At first, I hated the idea. It felt controlling, exactly the accusation Vanessa had thrown at me. Rebecca anticipated my reaction. "This isn't about controlling her life." "It sounds like it." "No." She leaned forward. "It's about preventing someone else from controlling it." That perspective changed everything. The trust would remain entirely Vanessa's. Every dollar, every asset, every benefit. Nothing would be diverted elsewhere. But there would be one condition. Michael Carter could never access it. Not directly, not indirectly, not through marriage, not through financial authority, not through legal maneuvering. The trust would remain protected until Vanessa independently controlled her own financial decisions. When Rebecca finished explaining the structure, I sat quietly for several minutes, thinking, remembering, praying. Finally, I nodded. Let's do it. Those 3 words set everything into motion. Over the following months, paperwork consumed my life. Meetings, signatures, witnesses, notarizations, revisions. The process felt endless, yet throughout it all, one thought kept returning. Daniel. I wondered what he would think. I wondered whether he would approve. One evening, after returning home from another legal meeting, I retrieved his letter from the safe once again. By then, I had read it dozens of times. The paper had begun to soften at the folds. I sat at my kitchen table and slowly reread every word. When I reached the familiar sentence, I stopped. Someday, Vanessa may need protection from someone she trusts completely. This time, something else caught my attention. A line beneath it that I had somehow overlooked for years. Love her enough to let her learn difficult truths. I stared at the words, again and again. Love her enough to let her learn difficult truths. Suddenly, I understood something painful. I couldn't rescue Vanessa from this. Not completely. Not immediately. Some lessons cannot be taught. They have to be experienced. The realization broke my heart, because every maternal instinct inside me wanted to rush in and fix everything, to expose Michael, to force Vanessa to listen, to make her see what I saw. But Rebecca was right. If I pushed harder, Michael would simply use it against me. Every warning would become evidence of interference. Every concern would become proof of manipulation. Every attempt to help would drive her further away. So I stopped, not because I gave up, because I changed strategies. For the first time since being blocked, I stopped trying to contact Vanessa. I stopped mailing letters. I stopped sending messages. I stopped searching for indirect ways to reach her. The silence felt unbearable. Birthdays passed. No phone calls. Holidays passed. No invitations. Months continued slipping away. Still nothing. Some nights I sat in the living room staring at old family photographs, pictures from vacations, graduations, Christmas mornings, simple moments, the kind that become priceless after they're gone. I often wondered whether Vanessa ever looked at those photographs too, or whether Michael had successfully rewritten our entire history. Then something unexpected happened. About 6 months into the legal restructuring, Thomas Reed contacted Rebecca with an update. Another piece of information had surfaced. Not criminal, not explosive, but important. Michael had become increasingly involved in Vanessa's finances. Joint accounts, budget decisions, investment choices, debt management. Nothing unusual for a married couple on the surface. Except for one detail. The control appeared heavily one-sided. Vanessa's independence was shrinking. Michael's authority was growing. The pattern confirmed what we already feared. Rebecca listened to the report before turning toward me. Norma, we made the right decision. I wanted to feel reassured. Instead, I felt devastated, because every confirmation meant my daughter was sinking deeper into the situation. A few weeks later, we finalized the last major revisions. The trust protections were complete. The estate plan was secured. Every vulnerability Rebecca identified had been addressed. Michael could spend years trying to position himself for future inheritance. It wouldn't matter. The doors were closed. Legally, permanently. As I signed the final documents, Rebecca handed me a sealed envelope. "What is this?" "A copy of the protection package." I looked at the thick envelope. "When does Vanessa receive it?" Rebecca's answer surprised me. "Only if necessary." I frowned. What does that mean? It means we wait. For what? The truth. I didn't fully understand then, but I would soon, because life has a way of revealing people's intentions eventually. Masks slip, pressure builds, secrets surface, and according to Thomas, pressure was already beginning to build inside Vanessa's marriage. Financial strain was increasing. Debt was becoming harder to hide. The polished image Michael had carefully maintained for years was starting to crack. For the first time, I allowed myself a small amount of hope. Not hope that Michael would change. Hope that Vanessa might finally see him clearly. But even I couldn't have predicted how quickly things would unravel. Because while I was quietly protecting her future, Michael's carefully constructed world was beginning to collapse. And when it did, the first person he blamed wasn't himself. It was me. The collapse didn't happen all at once. Like most disasters, it began with small cracks, tiny fractures that were easy to ignore, easy to explain away, easy to blame on bad luck. At least that's what Michael convinced Vanessa to believe. I didn't know everything happening inside their marriage at the time. Most of what I'm about to tell you came from documents, later conversations, and information Vanessa shared after the truth finally surfaced. But the picture became very clear. The financial pressure that had been building for years was reaching a breaking point, and Michael was running out of places to hide. The first warning sign appeared when several credit accounts approached their limits. Then came missed payments, followed by collection notices, then additional loans. Michael always had an explanation. Unexpected business expenses, delayed commissions, temporary cash flow problems, investment opportunities that simply needed more time. Vanessa believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was her husband, the man she trusted, the man she had defended against everyone else, including me. Every time another problem appeared, Michael found someone else to blame. The economy, the market, clients, banks, eventually me. Especially me. According to Vanessa, my name started appearing in conversations almost daily. If your mother hadn't created so much tension, things would be easier. If your mother cared about you, she'd help. If your mother wasn't so controlling, we'd have more options. The accusations became constant, relentless. And because Vanessa had spent nearly a year separated from me, she had no competing voice, no alternative perspective, only Michael's version of reality, exactly as he wanted. Meanwhile, I continued living quietly in Columbus, working part-time, volunteering, meeting regularly with Rebecca, waiting. The waiting was the hardest part. There is something uniquely painful about watching someone you love walk toward a cliff while knowing they refuse to hear your warnings. Every instinct urges you to intervene, yet intervention would only push them further away. So you wait, and pray, and hope truth arrives before permanent damage does. Then one afternoon, Rebecca called. "Norma?" Immediately, I recognized something different in her voice. "What happened?" "I received information from Thomas." My heart started racing. "What kind of information?" "Financial pressure is accelerating." I sat down slowly. "How bad?" Rebecca paused. "Much worse than before." Thomas had discovered that multiple debts were converging simultaneously. Several creditors were becoming aggressive. Certain payments were significantly overdue. The situation appeared unstable. For the first time, Rebecca sounded genuinely concerned. "Norma, I think events are moving faster than we expected." I understood exactly what she meant. The cracks were becoming visible, and visible cracks create panic, especially in people hiding something. Several weeks later, another update arrived. This one was even worse. Michael had apparently begun moving money between accounts to manage short-term problems, not necessarily illegally, but desperately, like someone trying to plug holes in a sinking boat. One debt paid another, one loan covered another obligation, one financial emergency temporarily concealed the next. The cycle couldn't continue forever. Sooner or later, reality would catch up. Then it happened. The first major collision. Vanessa discovered that a mortgage payment had been missed. Not delayed, missed. Completely. At first, Michael claimed it was a banking error, then an administrative issue, then a paperwork mistake. But the explanations kept changing, and changing, and changing. For the first time in years, Vanessa began asking questions. Real questions. Questions Michael didn't like. Questions he couldn't easily answer. The arguments started shortly afterward. Frequent. Intense. Increasingly emotional. Michael responded the way manipulators often do when control begins slipping. He attacked. Not physically, emotionally, psychologically. Every discussion somehow became Vanessa's fault, or the bank's fault, or my fault. Anything except his. The more pressure increased, the more irrational he became. And then something unexpected happened. Vanessa stopped accepting every explanation automatically. Not completely, not yet. But doubt had appeared. A tiny crack in the wall Michael spent years building. Once doubt enters control, becomes much harder to maintain. A few days later, another financial notice arrived. Then another, then another. By that point, even Vanessa could no longer pretend everything was normal. The marriage had entered a dangerous phase. The phase where lies require increasingly larger lies to survive. The phase where reality begins demanding answers. The phase where secrets become difficult to contain. Rebecca and I discussed the situation extensively. Finally, she asked a question. "How much longer do we wait?" I knew exactly what she meant. The protection package, the envelope, the documents, the truth. Everything we had prepared. For months we had planned to use them only if absolutely necessary. Maybe that moment had arrived. I looked out her office window. The answer felt enormous. Because once those documents reached Vanessa, nothing would ever be the same. Her marriage, her relationship with Michael, her understanding of me. Everything would change. "Is she ready?" I asked. Rebecca sighed. "I don't know." Neither did I, but one thing had become clear. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. If we waited too long, real damage could occur, not just financially, emotionally, legally, possibly permanently. Several days later, Rebecca made her recommendation. "We deliver it." I sat silently, thinking, praying, remembering the little girl who used to hide birthday cards under Daniel's pillow, remembering the teenager who called me every afternoon after school, remembering the young woman who once told me I would always be her best friend. Then I remembered the unopened gifts, the blocked phone calls, the returned letters, the empty holidays, and despite all of it, my answer remained the same. "Protect her." Rebecca nodded. "I will." The package was finalized the following week. Every document carefully organized. Every legal protection clearly explained. Every piece of evidence professionally prepared. The trust documents, the estate protections, the investigative findings, the financial records, the information about Michael. Everything. The envelope became much thicker than I expected, almost symbolic. A year of hidden truth compressed into a stack of paper. Then came the day, a rainy Thursday afternoon, one I will never forget. I wasn't present when the delivery occurred. That was intentional. Rebecca believed it would be better if emotions remained separate from the process. So instead, a representative from her office personally delivered the package. Hand delivery, signature required. No possibility of interception. No possibility of disappearance. No possibility of Michael quietly hiding it. Vanessa answered the door. The representative introduced himself, asked her to confirm her identity, then handed her the envelope. According to his report later, her face immediately changed. Confusion, alarm, fear. The return address contained Rebecca Hayes' law firm, my attorney, my name, legal documents. The combination was terrifying, especially for someone who hadn't spoken to me in nearly a year. Vanessa reportedly asked the question everyone expected. "Am I being sued?" The representative simply replied that he wasn't authorized to discuss the contents. Then he left. And for several minutes, Vanessa reportedly stood frozen in the doorway holding the envelope, staring at it, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to understand, because she believed the package contained punishment, retribution, a legal attack, the final consequence of abandoning her mother. She had no idea she was holding something entirely different. Not revenge, not anger, not retaliation. Protection. The most important protection her father and I had ever prepared. And once she opened that envelope, the entire foundation of Michael Carter's carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. I wasn't there when Vanessa opened the envelope, but later she told me every detail, every moment, every emotion. And as painful as it was to hear, I understood why she remembered it so clearly. Some days divide your life into 2 chapters, before the truth and after it. That afternoon became one of those days. According to Vanessa, she carried the envelope into the kitchen and placed it on the table. For nearly 20 minutes, she simply stared at it. The law firm's logo felt intimidating, threatening, official. Everything about it suggested conflict. She expected legal action, a lawsuit, a demand, maybe even a formal declaration that I had finally given up on her. Eventually, curiosity overcame fear. She opened the package. The first document she saw wasn't a lawsuit. It was a letter from Rebecca Hayes. Professional, respectful, direct. The opening sentence immediately confused her. "Dear Vanessa Carter, these documents are being provided for your protection and future financial security." Protection, not punishment. The word didn't make sense. She kept reading. Rebecca explained that the package contained information relevant to her legal and financial interests. Information that had been carefully preserved for years. Information she needed to review personally, without outside influence. That last phrase caught her attention. Without outside influence. For the first time, Vanessa felt uneasy. Not because of me, because of Michael. Then she turned the page. The next document carried a familiar name. Daniel Bell. Her father, my late husband. Vanessa told me her hands started shaking immediately. She hadn't expected to see his name, especially not inside a legal package, especially not after so many years. The document outlined the trust Daniel had created before his death, the trust she never knew existed, the trust designed specifically for her future. She read every line twice, then a third time. Certain details seemed impossible. The trust had existed for decades, quietly protected, carefully managed, never touched, never withdrawn, never redirected. Every dollar remained reserved for her. Not me, not anyone else. Her. According to Rebecca's letter, I had never altered Daniel's intention. Not once. Despite every argument, every accusation, every painful year, the trust remained hers. Always. Vanessa later admitted that was the first moment she began questioning everything she believed, because the story Michael had spent years telling suddenly stopped making sense. If I was truly controlling, why preserve assets for her? If I was truly manipulative, why protect her interests while receiving nothing myself? If I was truly selfish, why keep the trust untouched for over 20 years? The questions multiplied rapidly. Then she reached the next section, the protection provisions, the conditional trust modifications, the legal safeguards. Everything Rebecca and I had spent months creating. At first, Vanessa misunderstood. She thought I was controlling her from beyond the grave, punishing her marriage. But Rebecca's explanations were thorough, patient, detailed. The documents made one thing clear. The restrictions applied to one person, Michael Carter, not Vanessa, never Vanessa. Every protection existed for the same reason, to ensure that whatever Daniel left behind would benefit his daughter, not someone seeking access through her. As Vanessa continued reading, confusion slowly transformed into alarm. Then came the investigative report, the thickest section of the package, the section Rebecca had agonized over including, the section that changed everything. Inside were records, financial summaries, public filings, debt histories, professional discrepancies, evidence collected legally and carefully. Nothing exaggerated, nothing sensationalized. Just facts. Cold. Documented. Verifiable facts. The first pages detailed Michael's debt. Vanessa stared at the numbers in disbelief. The amount was far larger than anything he had ever disclosed. Several accounts were completely unfamiliar. Others had never been mentioned. A few carried balances she couldn't comprehend. Her first reaction wasn't anger. It was denial. There must be a mistake. There had to be. Michael would have told her. Wouldn't he? Then she reached the supporting documentation. The account histories, the dates, the records, the signatures. Everything matched. Everything was real. The room suddenly felt smaller, harder to breathe in. She continued reading. The next section detailed Michael's pattern of financial behavior, past relationships, professional inconsistencies, repeated debt cycles, repeated dependency on financially stable environments, repeated efforts to project success while concealing instability again and again. The same pattern, the same behavior, the same outcomes. Vanessa told me later that she kept hoping the next page would somehow clear him. Explain everything. Prove there was a misunderstanding. Instead, each page deepened the concern. Then she reached the final section. The section Thomas considered most important. Copies of inheritance-related research, estate contest information, trust challenge material, legal topics Michael had repeatedly explored. By then, the pieces had begun fitting together. The questions about my house, the questions about my savings, the questions about wills, trusts, insurance, inheritance, everything. For years, Michael had acted interested in my finances. Now she understood why. The realization hit with devastating force, not because it proved he married her for money. The documents didn't claim that, but they did reveal something equally troubling. He had been planning around potential future assets for years, thinking about them, researching them, positioning himself around them, and he had never told her. By the time Vanessa finished reading, she was crying. Not quietly, not gracefully, the kind of crying that comes when reality shatters something fundamental inside you. Then she found one final item, a handwritten note from me, only a single page. No legal language, no accusations, no anger, just a mother's words. Vanessa, I never stopped loving you, not for one day, not for 1 hour, not even when you blocked me. Everything in this package exists because your father and I wanted you protected. You may disagree with me. You may be angry with me, but please read everything carefully before making any decisions. Love, Mom. She told me later that those few lines hurt more than any document because they forced her to confront a possibility she had spent nearly a year avoiding. What if I had never been the enemy? What if Michael had convinced her to fear the wrong person? The front door opened shortly afterward. Michael came home. He immediately noticed something was wrong. Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. Her eyes were red. The envelope remained open. His expression changed instantly. What is all this? She didn't answer. What happened? Still nothing. Then he noticed the law firm's letterhead. I imagine his stomach dropped. Because according to Vanessa, his entire demeanor shifted. Not concern, not curiosity. Fear. Genuine fear. He crossed the room quickly. Where did you get those? The question wasn't normal. Most people would ask what the document said. Michael wanted to know where they came from. Vanessa looked up. My mother's attorney. The silence that followed felt enormous. Then Michael held out his hand. Give them to me. She didn't move. Vanessa. Why? His jaw tightened. I need to review them. No. The words surprised both of them. For perhaps the first time in years, Vanessa wasn't accepting instructions automatically. She wasn't surrendering authority. She wasn't allowing him to control the conversation. She was thinking independently, and Michael knew it. The fear in his eyes confirmed everything, because innocent people usually want the truth examined. They don't panic when someone reads it. That evening marked the beginning of the end, not because the marriage ended immediately. It didn't. But because something far more important happened. Trust broke. For the first time, Vanessa stopped asking herself whether her mother was lying and started asking whether her husband was. The answer was waiting much closer than she realized, because within days she would uncover evidence far worse than hidden debt. Evidence proving that Michael hadn't just concealed the truth. He had crossed a line that could carry serious legal consequences. And once she found it, there would be no going back. The first lie shattered on a Saturday morning. The second lie destroyed the marriage. And the third brought the police into the story. At least that's how Vanessa described it later. After receiving the documents from Rebecca's office, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, another question surfaced. Another inconsistency, another memory that suddenly looked different. Michael sensed the change immediately. Manipulative people often do. They can feel control slipping long before anyone says it out loud. For the next several days, he tried everything: charm, concern, affection, anger, guilt, every tool he had used successfully for years. But something had changed. The spell was breaking. And once someone begins seeing manipulation clearly, it's difficult to unsee it. According to Vanessa, she started reviewing financial records while Michael was away at work, not because she wanted to catch him, because she desperately hoped the documents were wrong. She wanted proof that Rebecca's investigation had missed something, that there was an explanation, a misunderstanding, a reasonable answer. Instead, she found something much worse. The first discovery seemed small, a loan document. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Then she noticed a signature, her signature, or something very close to it. She stared at the page, confused. The date didn't make sense. She didn't remember signing it. The amount didn't make sense either. Neither did the purpose. She searched through additional paperwork. Another document appeared, then another, then another. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Several financial agreements carried signatures she couldn't clearly remember authorizing. Some looked authentic, others looked suspicious. All of them benefited Michael. By the time she finished reviewing the files, her hands were shaking. That afternoon, she called Rebecca Hayes, the same attorney whose letters she had ignored for years, the same attorney she once assumed was helping me interfere in her life. Rebecca answered immediately. Vanessa later told me she expected judgment. Instead, she received calm professionalism. "I think there's a problem," Vanessa said. Rebecca's response was simple. "Tell me everything." For nearly an hour, Vanessa described what she had found. When she finished, Rebecca asked for copies. Every document, every record, every statement, everything. Within 24 hours, Rebecca's office completed an initial review. The findings were deeply concerning. Several signatures required further examination. Multiple transactions demanded explanation. Some records appeared inconsistent with information Michael previously provided. Rebecca didn't make accusations. She didn't jump to conclusions. But she strongly recommended that Vanessa take immediate protective steps, including securing personal financial records, changing passwords, protecting account access, and documenting everything. That recommendation terrified Vanessa, because for the first time the threat felt real, not theoretical, not emotional, real. That evening, Michael came home to find her waiting. The documents were spread across the kitchen table. Every questionable record, every suspicious transaction, every unanswered question. His face changed instantly. "What is this?" Vanessa pointed to the papers. "I want answers." The room fell silent. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Michael laughed. Not because anything was funny, because he was buying time. Manipulators often do that when surprised. They need a moment to regroup. "Aren't we overreacting a little?" "No." His smile weakened. "Vanessa, no." She pushed one document forward. "Explain this." Michael glanced at the page, then quickly looked away. The reaction told her more than any explanation could. "What is it you think you found?" The question wasn't an answer. It was a diversion, and for the first time Vanessa recognized it. "I think I found a loan I never agreed to." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Another silence, then another. The conversation escalated rapidly. Michael became defensive. then angry, then aggressive. Not physically, verbally, emotionally. Years of carefully controlled behavior began cracking under pressure. The polished image disappeared. The charming consultant vanished. In his place stood someone desperate, someone cornered, someone frightened. According to Vanessa, one statement changed everything. "You sound exactly like your mother." The words hung in the air. For years, that accusation had worked. It had ended arguments, created guilt, triggered self-doubt. This time it had the opposite effect. Instead of backing down, Vanessa looked directly at him. My mother was right. The silence afterward felt enormous. Michael stared at her. She stared back. Neither moved. Then his expression hardened completely. The mask finally dropped. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "No," Vanessa replied quietly. "I think I finally do." The argument continued late into the evening. By midnight, Vanessa knew something important. She no longer trusted her husband. The realization broke her heart. Because losing trust doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. One lie, then another, until eventually, nothing feels solid anymore. The following morning, Rebecca contacted local authorities regarding several concerns requiring professional review. No dramatic accusations, no emotional claims, simply documented facts. Potential financial irregularities, potential unauthorized transactions, potential signature issues. The proper legal process began. And once it began, events moved quickly. Meanwhile, I knew almost none of this. Rebecca intentionally limited what she shared, partly because investigations required discretion, partly because she knew how emotionally invested I was. Then my phone rang. For a moment, I almost ignored it. The number wasn't familiar. Something told me to answer. "Hello." Silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in nearly a year. "Mom." Everything inside me stopped. My heart, my thoughts, my breath. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Then tears filled my eyes. "Vanessa." Her voice broke immediately. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words nearly destroyed me. Not because they fixed anything, because I could hear the pain behind them, the regret, the confusion, the heartbreak. For several minutes, neither of us discussed Michael, or lawyers, or investigations, or trust funds. We simply cried. A mother and daughter separated by 11 months of silence, trying to find our way back to each other. Eventually, Vanessa asked the question I had been waiting to hear. "Why didn't you stop fighting for me?" The question stunned me, because from her perspective I had. I took a deep breath. "I never stopped." She began crying again. "I blocked you." "I know. I said terrible things." "I know. You should hate me." "No." The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without effort. "No, because parents don't stop loving their children simply because their children make mistakes. At least good parents don't." We talked for nearly 2 hours. Not everything was resolved, not even close, but something important happened. Truth entered the conversation. For the first time in years, neither of us was speaking through Michael's influence. Neither of us was defending a narrative. Neither of us was protecting a lie. We were simply talking, mother and daughter, the way we used to. Near the end of the call, Vanessa asked one final question. "Would you come here?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, because I wanted to be careful. This isn't about rescuing me. I know. I need to do this myself. I know. Another pause. Then why do I want you here? My voice trembled slightly. Because nobody should face the truth alone. When I arrived later that afternoon, Vanessa opened the door. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she stepped forward and hugged me, tightly, desperately, like someone who had finally found solid ground after drifting at sea. And for the first time in nearly a year, I held my daughter again. Not as a hero, not as a savior, simply as her mother. While inside the house, investigators continued their work, lawyers continued theirs, and Michael Carter's carefully constructed world continued falling apart. The final consequences were now unavoidable, and soon all that remained would be deciding whether our family could heal from the damage he left behind. People often imagine healing as a single moment, a dramatic apology, a tearful reunion, a powerful speech that magically fixes everything. Real life doesn't work that way. At least ours didn't. The day Vanessa and I hugged again wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of a very long road back. Over the following months, reality continued unfolding. The legal reviews progressed. Financial records were examined. Documents were verified. Questions were answered. Some answers were painful. Others were shocking. Several of the transactions Vanessa had discovered required extensive investigation. Some mistakes could be explained. Others could not. By the time the process concluded, Michael faced serious legal consequences related to financial misconduct and unauthorized activities connected to accounts and documents he had controlled. I won't pretend I celebrated. Contrary to what some people believe, watching someone's life collapse isn't satisfying, not even when that person caused tremendous pain. What I felt was sadness, because no matter how justified the outcome was, destruction leaves damage behind, and my daughter had to live through that damage. The divorce process began shortly afterward. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, financially complicated. For years, Michael had positioned himself at the center of nearly every aspect of Vanessa's life. Untangling that influence took time. Much more time than either of us expected. Some days she sounded strong, confident, determined. Other days she sounded broken, ashamed, lost. Whenever those moments came, I tried to remember something important. She wasn't only grieving a marriage, she was grieving the version of reality she believed in, the future she thought she was building, the person she thought she married. That kind of grief runs deep, much deeper than people realize. One evening, several months after our reunion, Vanessa sat across from me at my kitchen table. The same kitchen where Daniel and I once planned our future. The same kitchen where I had cried after every returned birthday gift. The same kitchen where I had reread Daniel's letter countless times. Vanessa wrapped both hands around a coffee mug. For several minutes she stared down at it. Then she spoke. "I don't know how to forgive myself." The words were barely above a whisper. I looked at her carefully. She looked exhausted, older somehow. Not physically, emotionally. "I hurt you." I remained silent. "I hurt the kids." Silence again. "I pushed away the one person who never stopped loving me." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know how to live with that." That was the moment I realized something important. My daughter wasn't looking for excuses. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She wasn't looking for someone else to blame. She was taking responsibility. And responsibility is where healing begins. Not perfection. Not punishment. Responsibility. I reached across the table and took her hand. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said something I had spent months thinking about. Forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. She looked up. What do you mean? I forgave you a long time ago. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. But trust takes time. She nodded slowly, because she understood. The truth was simple. I loved her completely, always had, always would. But 11 months of silence doesn't disappear overnight. Neither do the wounds. Healing required honesty, patience, consistency, and time. Lots of time. Over the following year, we slowly rebuilt our relationship. Not through grand gestures, through ordinary moments. Phone calls, coffee visits, family dinners, conversations, the small things that create real connection. For the first time in years, I also saw my grandchildren regularly again. Emily had grown taller. Jacob's voice had changed. The lost time hurt, but I refused to spend our future trapped inside regret. Instead, I focused on gratitude. Gratitude that we still had a future. Many families never receive that chance. Then one afternoon, nearly a year after the legal envelope arrived at Vanessa's door, I finally gave her something I had protected for more than 2 decades. Daniel's final letter. Not the one addressed to me, the one addressed to her. The envelope had yellowed slightly with age, but it remained sealed, untouched, waiting. I carried it into the living room where Vanessa sat reading. When she saw it, her expression immediately changed. What is that? I sat beside her. A letter from your father. Her eyes widened. My father... I nodded. He wrote it before he died. For a moment she couldn't speak. Neither could I. Then I placed the envelope in her hands. You've waited long enough. Her fingers trembled as she carefully opened it. The room became completely silent. She unfolded the paper, then began reading. I won't share every word. Some things belong only to family. But I can tell you what mattered most. Daniel wrote about love, about integrity, about courage, about the importance of choosing people who bring peace into your life rather than confusion. He wrote about responsibility, about character, about truth. And near the end, he wrote something that made both of us cry. If you're reading this, it means life has probably been more complicated than I hoped. If you've made mistakes, learn from them. If you've been hurt, heal from it. If you've hurt someone, make it right. Most importantly, never doubt that your mother loves you. She is stronger than either of us knows. By the time Vanessa finished reading, neither of us had dry eyes. For a long time, we simply sat together, remembering him, missing him, feeling grateful for him. Finally, Vanessa looked at me. Did you really keep this all these years? Every single year? She shook her head. Why? The answer came easily. Because your father trusted me to protect it until the right time. A small smile appeared through her tears. Looks like he trusted the right person. Those words meant more to me than she will ever understand. Not because they erased the past. Nothing can do that. Because they acknowledged the truth that had survived grief, manipulation, silence, distance, and heartbreak. A few weeks later, Vanessa and the children came to my house for dinner. Nothing special, just a normal evening. Emily helped set the table. Jacob talked endlessly about baseball. Vanessa laughed at something I said. For a moment, I looked around the room and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not perfect peace. Real peace. The kind earned through struggle. the kind that exists because people choose honesty over comfort, growth over denial, love over pride. As I watched my family around that table, I thought about the envelope that had changed everything. The envelope Vanessa once feared. The envelope she believed contained punishment. In reality, it contained something much more powerful: truth. And sometimes truth arrives in unexpected packaging. Sometimes it arrives inside legal documents. Sometimes inside painful conversations. Sometimes inside consequences we never wanted to face. But when truth finally arrives, it gives us something lies never can: a chance to begin again. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is that love is not the same as control. Sometimes when we love someone deeply, we want to protect them from every mistake, every disappointment, and every painful experience. But life doesn't always allow that. There were many moments when I wanted to force my daughter to see the truth. I wanted to expose every lie, confront every manipulation, and rescue her from every bad decision. But real love isn't always about pulling someone back. Sometimes it's about standing ready when they find their own way home. Another lesson is that manipulation rarely begins with obvious cruelty. It often starts with small doubts, subtle isolation, and carefully planted ideas. That's why it's so important to maintain healthy relationships, ask questions, and trust actions more than words. Most importantly, forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let pain define the rest of your life. Healing takes time. Trust takes effort. But families can recover when honesty, accountability, and love are stronger than pride. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship with someone you love? What lesson stayed with you the most? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. If you enjoy stories about family resilience, second chances, and emotional healing, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for spending this time with me.